don't have a screen. I'm going to speak just as is, because it's for so short. Well, these are great presentations, and I learned a lot, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make some comments. I should emphasize heavily, this is not a topic I have invested much in. So that's one reason for not sharing my screen. But I've seen that Finland, which is my home country, is struggling a lot with these problems, because the dependency ratio for Finland is really terrible, and they going to have to do something about it. I want to focus on pensions, because I'm a contract theorist, and I understand. I have followed some of Bob Merton's, my colleagues' work, and I'm going to heavily rely on his vision of how to reform the pension system. Now, let me say, this is not going to be technical and complicated, and this is still not something that has been implemented, so it's kind of speculative. But I think with the increasing technology and increasing pressures on doing something, I think this is a reasonable thing to talk about. So the main problem Bob Merton has identified, and I think we all have identified actually, is this problem that we are switching, companies are switching from defined benefit to defined contribution. Defined benefit isn't a possibility anymore unless one goes down the Albert Park route, where the government takes over everything. So which I'm not in favor of. So that's kind of the challenging, because, and this is really Bob's main point, Bob Merton's main point, is that when you switch from defined benefit to defined compensation, you are switching a mindset. You are switching your mindset from actually income insurance, which is the defined benefit plan. We are talking about guaranteed income or index guaranteed income. When we go to defined contribution, as it's 401k here in the US and elsewhere, where we ourselves have to sort of accumulate assets, suddenly we are thinking about wealth. That's how we get the reports. I look at my reports every now and then, how much, increasingly so, by the way, how much have I accumulated? And Bob Merton's point is, wealth, the risk involved with sort of focusing on wealth is terrible for income, or potentially terrible for income risk. That is, income risk is very different from wealth risk. So you can have an income that is something like a treasury bond or something like that, which is it sort of gives supposedly a constant. There's no risk in that sense of what it's pay off. But with interest rates varying and for instance, the timing on when I would have started my annuity, I just retired, by the way, a couple of years ago. I didn't even think about going into annuities because it was an unfavorable time. So the point is that there's an enormous, actually, income risk in these plans that are currently in place. And this way we are reporting about income, about wealth, and the attention on wealth, which everybody is studying nowadays, that's old, it's just wrong-headed, is his point. Because he's starting from the premise that what we really need is we need income insurance. And the second thing he puts on the table is that it's not just inflation risk that is the issue. We can index the inflation. We also need to index the standard of living, especially for young people who start early with their plans, because we want to have a standard of living that's really what we want. We don't want to have, inflation. If there's a huge change in the standard of living, then you may fall behind. So those are his sort of conceptual starting points that I think are interesting, and on the whole, I see them as right-headed. The question then is, how can you, with defined contribution, actually come up with something that essentially ensures your income? That's sort of and this is where financial technology steps in, and that's where the magician, which Bob Merton is a magician, really. He somehow manages to transition this or transfer this risk through basically dynamic portfolio strategies. So so it's a continuous time strategy which has equities and then deferred annuities. And I come back to this deferred annuities of a particular. Deferred annuity means that the annuities, I'm buying now something that will, when I'm 65 or 67 or whatever I want, it could be made contingent on something else. That's when it starts. And so it's indexed, and it's not just a deferred annuity, it's indexed to inflation, and it's indexed to standard of living, which he usually thinks of as basically consumption or some measure of consumption. So that's the part of the basic sort of trick of how to transition take the DC income and turn it into something that actually looks more like a DB plan. Of course, behind it is also the government's, social security net. So I am with Albert. There should be a significant social security net, but he's talking mainly about America or the developed economies. The markets are not ready for this, really. I mean, there are some places like, I can't say the names because I'm worried that I'm revealing something, but there are some major companies, that actually are trying to implement this Bob Merton strategy and finds it, the continuous time thing is a very complicated matter. But one of the instruments he is putting on the table is what he calls selfies or government issues bonds, which are time contingent, and they are of this deferred variety. And that government should issue a lot of these at different maturities and at different starting dates. And those are the things that then financial advisors and others can advise you to actually buy.
2 minutes.
And 2 minutes, okay. So a big part of this is that with the current, level of technology, this is doable in Bob Merton's mind. And he wants to substitute with this new technology a complicated problem for the consumer. Looking at wealth, how much wealth I should have, what amount of equity versus debt, all these things, they in his view are largely wrong-headed and hard for the consumer to understand. When you give it to this program, the technology is basically substituting the consumer's choice problem into a much simpler problem where the consumer basically just says, when do I plan to retire and how much income do I want, or what kind of standard of living do I want? And it's a bit of a pipe dream still, but I think it's looking in the right direction. The other component, the last component, which I want to say is very big on the idea that we should use reverse mortgages and other ways of extracting money from the assets we have. Reverse mortgages are becoming more popular, but they are still on bad terms, not on such good terms, and this should be made, and here also the government could play a role. Let me close with a funny anecdote, which is, I don't know if anybody saw in 1997, there was a unusual obituary in The Economist of a woman named Jean Calment. I don't know if I pronounce it right because it's a French name. She lived to 122. She had actually a reverse mortgage. And the person who underwrote the reverse mortgage, he died earlier than her. And she kept living and living. And the first line in this obituary was, not much happened to Mrs. Calvet in the first 100 years. Because after she became 100 years, she became a very famous, that's why she was in The Economist, because every year they brought up this fact that she is on a reverse mortgage and she's still living, and she's coming, relying on it. So let me just close by saying that that we are facing big social, and I don't say anything of that, challenges, financial challenges. Pension systems have to change. Pension systems should really start looking or turn more to the opportunities that new technologies have. This, of course, will be difficult for developing economies. So this is just, I'm talking We are talking here, but Europe is far behind, in my view, on this issue. And the final word is, I'm just echoing what Linda and others said. You know, I think living here in the U.S., people, the volunteering in the U.S. Actually, I live in Boston on Beacon Hill. Everybody but us are really volunteering. You know, it's just part of their life, and it keeps their mind, you know, active. And there's strong evidence, I think somebody showed it, that if you're active in some way, like volunteering, it really helps, you know, reduce the dementia and so on. So I would say Europe in particular, my own country in particular, they should really start looking at the third sector as an opportunity to bridge the gap. Linda has spoken much more about this, so I'm just echoing what you are saying, but I think that there needs to be a wake-up call on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. And would the representatives from Luohan Academy like to close the session?
I just want to say thank you for all your time and participation. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you in the next dialogue.